My name is Lamb. I will be the facilitator for our Let's Talk community discussion series this year. I just wanted to take a moment to thank the MHIP team for their help. This is my first one, and I will be joining you all for the rest of the year. And so I'm so excited to be here with you. And thank you to the team for helping me get settled. We have incredible folks who are helping to monitor the chat, as I mentioned. We have some MHIP folks that will be helping. Isabel is helping with translation. Thank you so much. And thank you to my MHIP team for tech support while we're getting this going. As a new person joining Let's Talk discussions, I just wanted to give a little bit of an introduction for myself. I work with Marin Healthy Youth Partnerships as a program coordinator for our Youth Advocacy Committee and Elevate Youth Internship Program. I also, just because we're situated in Marin, I also have to brag that I am a Basich Bear, a Kent Falcon, and a Redwood Giant. So it's very special to be here with all of you, especially as a product of our incredible community. Just for some background about my experience, I've worn many, many hats. I'm a former school leader, high school teacher, public health professional, specializing in epidemiology, health education, and mental health. And above all, I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm just excited to share this space with all of you. My hope is that our discussions this year are fruitful, solutions-based, and that we all leave with a greater understanding, compassion, and maybe most important, some actionable items that we can take in order to keep our community safe and healthy. I think that's why we're all here. So one quick little plug about Let's Talk. We have some incredible booklets that are available for you all. They were developed in partnership with Marin Prevention Network, MCOE, Marin County Office of Education, Marin Healthy Youth Partnerships, and OD Free Marin. The booklets were created in 2020 and are an incredible resource to Marin families that's available to help kind of understand local issues around underage substance use, and is available online. And I believe Linda might have put it in the chat for everyone. So thank you to Linda. Okay, so now we can get to the main event. I just had to do some quick introductions, and I know we're all here. We have tons to talk about and learn about. Okay, so now, thankfully, we have translation set up so that we can get to the main event. As I mentioned earlier, tonight we're looking at the current landscape of substance use among local youth, with a special focus on fentanyl, especially given recent trends, local reports. I know a lot of you are here because of a report that just came out today. We'll also be looking at psychedelics and Delta-8 THC products. We're going to discuss the key trends, as well as what action is currently being taken. And lastly, we'll provide an opportunity with more information, ways that you can support your community by being trained in Narcan administration, which is the opioid reversal medication as well. With everything we're seeing in the news, in our neighborhoods, and hearing from others around us, underage substance use is an issue everywhere, and can have scary, heartbreaking, and some really serious consequences for our young people. In Marin County, it is higher than state average. It is, in fact, 2 times the state average in terms of what we find with youth substance use. So you can imagine you're all here because it's incredibly important to us to figure this out. The landscape is constantly changing, so it's keeping us on our toes. And tonight we hope to educate you on what is going on, what young people are facing. We have an incredible young person to share a little bit about her work and also just provide some perspective as well. And most importantly, what the county, other organizations, and folks are doing about it, and what you as an individual can do about it as a parent, community member, and someone who cares about this. So I will take a little moment to just share a couple things, just housekeeping items. We are a community, and so we'd love to see your faces. If you'd like to have your camera on, we will not be hurt if your camera is off. We do have a chat function, and we have multiple folks who are keeping an eye on it. So that is the go-to place for any questions you have, any needs for support. And we love questions. We're going to have a rich, I imagine, a very rich conversation tonight after our speakers present. So you are welcome to start dropping your questions in the chat in case you might forget them like I do. And we'll keep an eye on those and be sharing them when we get to Q&A. With this, I'm going to pass it over to Lisa, who's going to share some additional guidelines for our conversation tonight.
Thanks, Molly, and good evening, everyone. Parenting is not easy, and parenting around substance use issues is hard. There's no silver bullet, so we try to give you information that you can incorporate into your parenting style to do the best job you can. We are all learning together. Please do not blame yourself for anything that you did or didn't do based on what you learned here today. Let's make this a safe space to share ideas and learn while not judging others or giving advice. Self-care is essential in our world now more than ever. Please join us for the full time you are able. Molly.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Just to reiterate, these are difficult things to hear. And so please be taking care of yourself, but also know that we have some incredible things to share in terms of what's happening in order to address this. And so with that, I'd love to introduce our very first speaker. Our first speaker is Lori Dubin. Lori is the founder of Be the Influence, the co-founder and current board member of Marin Healthy Youth Partnerships. Through this work, she has been educating Marin parents on adolescent substance use for the past 13 years. And she also is a proud parent of 3 Redwood High School graduates, go Giants, now in their 20s. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Lori.
Thanks, Molly. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Let's have the first slide, Melissa. So the idea behind Be the Influence, when I founded it many years ago, was simply to raise awareness among parents on youth substance use, giving them facts, strategies, so they can continue to be a positive influence in their kids' lives. As our kids become more independent, they are navigating a social scene that can involve alcohol and other drugs. And the goal has been to do this together as a community as we connect to protect. So the reason why it's so great and so important that so many of you showed up tonight is, as Molly said, in Marin County, our 11th graders report current alcohol and other drug use, and current is defined to mean the past 30 days, at rates that are twice the average rate of their peers in California. This data is based on the California Healthy Kids Survey, which is given every other year to our public school students. And our rates have been high for a long time, but needless to say, with fentanyl out there, the stakes are higher than ever. There's an extra level of risk to drug use, and it's why there's so many in our community that continue to work so hard on this, which you'll be learning more about tonight. Next Tuesday, October 10th, NHIP will be launching a campaign at an in-person event to discuss exactly how we can all take action to reduce this 2 times number. It's called Let's Be Average, and a link in the chat with the details should be showing up, and we hope that a lot of you can make it. Next slide, please. So it's important to know the entire Marin County landscape. These charts that are in the next slide, if you're able to show them, Melissa. There we go. These show, again, current past 30-day rates of alcohol and other drug use, marijuana use, vaping, vaping of tobacco, that is, and binge drinking. And as you could see, maybe not now, the slide has disappeared, but there's a whole lot of orange compared to the state's blue, which doesn't look so good. Trust me. We, in the next slide, if we can ever get it up, it's just important for us to understand the environment that our kids are navigating. It's one that's really different than what we experienced in our youth. Most of the drugs that we see today, so we are on There's the orange in Marin showing the 2 times rates for all the categories, the main categories. And skipping ahead to slide 5, you know, most of the drugs that we're seeing today, they've been around since we were in high school. They've changed with the times, and they've even changed as BTI has been around for the past 13 years. So a lot of our work is educating parents on what's out there. You know, alcohol obviously has been around forever, but today we're seeing flavored hard liquor, seltzers that are marketed to youth, marijuana. There's just a huge array of cannabis products out there in forms that don't resemble the cannabis plant. They have THC potencies, which THC is the active ingredient that gets users high, of now up to 99%, when in the 70s, Woodstock weed was between 1% and 4%. Tobacco, nicotine, as we know, just when we were making so much progress on smoking cigarettes, along came Juul and the flavored tobacco vaping epidemic. Here we go. Hallucinogens, they've been around. Shrooming was a thing before, but now we have psilocybin chocolate bars, we have gummies and vapes. And then finally, prescription pills, from Adderall to Xanax. I mean, these drugs just weren't around when we were growing up. And we certainly didn't have counterfeit prescription pills laced with fentanyl, as Matt and Jessica will discuss. So there's a lot to say about these substances, all of them, not enough time. And I just encourage everyone to go to the Be the Influence website, scroll through our blog entries at betheinfluence.org/blog. And you'll see we send out newsletters a couple times a year, and then we turn those newsletters into blogs. So there we go. There's the site. And let's go to the next slide on nicotine. We're proud to say that when Juul was just becoming a thing back in 2018, the parents that had signed up to receive our Be the Influence newsletters were quickly educated on this. The FDA, of course, cracked down on Juul and other brands, and we had local flavored bans in Marin, Prop 31 in California. So now technically only tobacco flavored vapes are allowed, but we know that kids are still getting their hands on illegal brands and flavored vapes that are sold online and in the illegal market. So Jessica can talk a little bit about what she's seeing at her school, but a lot of it is vaping. The next slide on cannabis, you can see just this huge array of flavored products and packaging that's designed to attract youth. And the products come in many forms, from the traditional joints with flower, as it's now called, and pre-rolls or pre-filled blunts, to concentrated THC extracts called shatter, butter, wax, and crumble, that are heated and inhaled through dab rigs, and then THC oils that are vaped. I mean, these are just forms that really weren't around even a decade ago. We've had the edibles and the drinks, you know, from chocolates and candies and sodas. And then there's also THC drops, and that can be added to liquids and tinctures, strips, and sprays that can be put under the tongue. So just a huge array of products that you see online and in legal dispensaries, and then in the illegal market. But what's new is the next slide shows that in the last few years, we've seen a huge variety of new intoxicating plant-based products that they're marketed as natural and medicinal. It's the same kind of wellification that we've seen with other drugs like cannabis. The reality is that many of these substances are chemically created, they're synthetic, and their effectiveness hasn't been evaluated by the FDA. They're loosely regulated, if regulated at all. So it's really hard to know with all of these products what you're getting and what harms can result. But the three categories that I'm going to discuss tonight are the intoxicating hemp derivatives, psilocybin, so-called magic mushrooms, and other psychedelics, and then kratom. And next slide, we see these intoxicating hemp-derived variant products that have exploded in recent years. We sent out a newsletter in the spring, and we also have a blog on the website that explains how this all came about. But basically, Congress in 2018 created a new category of federally legal hemp. And there was a huge loophole that resulted from this. The cannabis industry got chemically created, and they were able to convert the CBD in the cannabis plant through a chemical synthesis process into these variant compounds that are intoxicating hemp products. They were first unregulated, and then states rushed to either ban them or attempted to regulate them. There was never any minimum legal age requirement on a federal level. So in theory, any 10-year-old could buy these products. So in short, it's been a mess. And the most well-known variant is Delta 8 THC. It's generally weaker than traditional Delta 9 THC. And so this gave hemp products the reputation of being kind of milder, cannabis-light forms of THC. But because the products proliferated without adequate regulation, there was a huge increase in poison control center calls, emergency room visits, and this caused the FDA to issue a public health advisory warning of the health risks on Delta 8. Cutting to the chase, though, we're just seeing an alphabet soup of products that, although Delta 8 may be weaker, we're seeing all these variants that are stronger than your regular THC, with all these, THCO, which is 3 times stronger, and it comes from Delta 8, THCH, 25 times stronger, P is 33. And it's just important to know that none of these are regulated like cannabis is, if at all. So cutting to the chase, next slide is that these are being sold in local smoke shops and gas station convenience stores in Marin. When we first heard about these products, we decided to do some local field research, and we found at 2 San Rafael smoke shops a huge selection of products that look like these. You can see they look like candy. They've got packaging in bright colors that are designed to appeal to kids. And they come in all the typical forms that cannabis products come in. So flour, candies, gummies, other edibles, drinks, and vapes. The good news is that at least for the stores that we visited, there was a 21-year-old minimum age requirement. The 2 that we visited did not accept medical marijuana cards for 18 to 20-year-olds. But we know our kids are getting our hands on them. And as the next slide shows, we've also found these products in gas station convenience stores in Greenbrae, Corte Madera, where there are no age requirements to enter this store. The products were displayed at the cash register. And though they required proof of age of 21 to purchase, at one of the stores, the store clerk didn't even know what these products were. He didn't know that they were intoxicating. So we're just concerned that these are getting into the hands of kids. Next slide shows just how potent these products can be. I mean, the packages come with huge amounts of THC that you would get in a legal package. You can see the caution, what these do. May be hard to see, but it's not good. And the next slide shows that thanks to Matt Willis, Dr. Willis, Marin County issued over the summer in June a public health advisory, and this was to providers, and it basically made them aware that patients presenting with cannabis intoxication, that they should be asked whether they've consumed hemp products, and because they've seen this dramatic increase in 911 calls involving marijuana, cannabis, and including hemp products. So the next slide shows a topic that is a big one, along with psilocin. Psilocybin is the active compound in so-called magic mushrooms. And just the topic of psychedelics, we're going to talk about it in our next newsletter, focusing on these drugs. But the reason that we want to educate parents on this is that there's a lot of hype on the promise of psychedelics in treating a range of mental health disorders. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, clinical trials are underway. It's exciting, the potential. But because of the hype, we've seen a decrease in the perception of harm, because these are drugs that are being discussed as medicinal and natural, as cannabis was. And at the same time, we've seen greater access with two Bay Area cities, San Francisco, Oakland, Santa Cruz being a third one, that have recently decriminalized personal possession for adults over 21. And so when you combine both of these factors, the decrease in perception of harm and then greater access, this results in rates of use being increased. And this carries risks of harm. And as you can see from this slide, there are a lot of them. And it's first of all, it's important to distinguish between microdosing, that you've heard a lot about, maybe even tried, and normal recreational doses. And microdosing is about a 20th to a 10th of a dose for a trip. It's too little to trigger hallucinations, but we know that kids like to macrodose, and these are powerful drugs. And tragically, we have seen Marin County teens and young adults suffer great harms from adverse events, and we've seen 3 deaths in the last couple of years in our county. So the next slide shows that what we're now seeing with this decriminalization is packaged products that are available in retail stores. And you can see, I mean, they're colorfully packaged, they're fun names, Trippy Flip, and they're chocolate bars and gummies. This doesn't show it, but we've seen DMT vapes, and they are being sold in smoke shops in Oakland, in San Francisco, online. There's psychedelic churches that claim a religious exemption from product sales. If you want to really see what's out there, go to blissmushrooms.com. It used to list the 7 smoke shops in Oakland where you could purchase mushrooms, but this is just going to be a big issue as the hype continues, and we're going to be hearing a lot more about it. And there's a big difference between recreational use and therapeutic use. Molly, you gave me a sign.
I was just giving you a 2-minute warning.
Okay, so the next slide shows another herb. It's called kratom, and it comes from an evergreen tree in Southeast Asia. It can be taken in various forms. It's again marketed as, curing a lot of ills like anxiety and depression. And again, not well regulated and widely accessible. And it's again, we have seen instances of harms and a death of an American University student in Washington, D.C., a sophomore who the toxicology report showed kratom, and fentanyl. So just be aware. Take a deep breath, because the next slide shows that the good news is that parents can do a lot. We are still the #1 influence in our kids' lives. Your relationship with your child is everything, and we've got so many resources to help you keep the conversations going with them, and not just to have one big drug talk, but a series of conversations. And Be the Influence is now part of MHIP officially. We've worked with MHIP for years, but we've got these 4 evidence-based prevention initiatives. Be the Influence. You can join our community through a Facebook group. This is for parents who agree to follow the social host ordinance laws. If you host parties or gatherings, keep them substance free. It's going to be a space where we share information, and questions can be asked and answered. So I encourage you to go on Facebook if you're a user and join us. And then, let's talk. And Raising the Bar and Number Nourish are 3 other wonderful programs. So just know that there's many resources in our community. Jessica and Dr. Willis are going to discuss that further, how we as a county have really upped our game in more recent years to create a community where we can all thrive. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Lori, and thank you for your years of work in supporting our community around these really important topics. And we're excited. I've been monitoring. There are tons of questions coming in, and so I'm excited for our Q&A, which will happen after our presentations. With that, I'll move on to our second incredible presenter for the evening. Jessica Mendieta is a senior at Novato High School. She is a member of the Marin County Youth Commission and has also been a chair of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Other Drugs Subcommittee for the past 3 years. She also serves as co-chair for the OD Free Marin Youth Action Team. Jessica, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Molly. I'm going to try and share my screen. Hopefully it will work, but if not, we can just troubleshoot it along the way. I'm going to try and do it in slideshow mode, but okay, can everyone see my screen? Yeah, okay, perfect. So as Molly said, hi everyone, my name is Jessica, and I'm going to be training everyone here today on how to administer Narcan, the overdose reversal medication. So like she said, I'm part of the Marin County Youth Commission, and I'm chair of our commission this year. I'm also part of the OD Free Marin Youth Action Team. But most importantly, I'm a teen concerned with preventing overdoses and empowering my peers to do the same. So why overdose prevention? I think it's really important that we all recognize that substance use among teens does happen, and this doesn't mean that every teen will use, but it does mean that some will and some won't. And I think that it's really important that we have, conversations around substance use so that we can destigmatize the topic, because although it's important that substance use education discourage substance use, it's also really important for it to provide information on how to reduce risk if substance use does occur. And additionally, if substance use issues arise, teens need to feel comfortable enough to reach out for help, which is why it's so important that we have conversations and events like that from today. So jumping right into it, an overdose can be described as an injury to the body that happens when a drug is taken in excessive amounts, and an overdose can be fatal or non-fatal. So some of the key signs of an overdose are the person being unconscious or not being able to be woken up, the person's breathing being very shallow or the person not breathing at all, the person having pinpoint pupils, which just means that their pupils are super small, or the person having blue or gray lips or fingernails. Okay, so I'll be quickly touching on fentanyl since this is something that Dr. Matt Willis will be talking about further in his presentation. But put simply, fentanyl can be described as a powerful synthetic opioid that is mass-produced and readily available. So non-drug users are already less likely to be exposed to fentanyl, but if you or someone does use one resource that is available are fentanyl testing strips. And these testing strips can essentially be used to test whatever you're going to take for fentanyl. And it's really important to note that these test strips are not foolproof. So even if you test whatever you're going to use, it's still really important that you take other preventative measures like having Narcan on hand and making sure that someone else is around. And this might be where my slide stops working, so I'm gonna try and pull it up on my phone so that we can keep going. And so one reason that we've been hearing about fentanyl a lot in the news is because fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin, and additionally, it's the leading cause of accidental overdose. So this really just goes to show how dangerous fentanyl is. Um, and so moving on into what Narcan is. So Narcan is essentially a overdose, prevention medication. So Narcan is like an opioid antagonist. So this just means that its purpose is to block opioid or is to unblock the opioid receptors in order to allow the body to continue breathing. Okay, looks like we're back. And this is the Narcan that we'll all be learning how to use today. So Narcan, like I said, reverses opioid poisoning in minutes. It's not a substitute for calling emergency medical services. So if you give someone Narcan and it revives them, you'll still want to call 911 just because the person may need an additional dose of Narcan. And it's also really important to note that Narcan only works on opioids. And additionally, it can't harm anyone if they're not overdosing. So if you're unsure if the person's overdosing and you give them Narcan anyway and they're not overdosing, you're not going to do any harm to them. So the 4 steps would be to first recognize the overdose and call 911. And then after you call 911, you would want to perform rescue breathing with a face shield. If you have one, that's ideal. And then after that, you would want to go on to administer Narcan, and then you would provide what we call aftercare. And I'd also like to note that when you call 911, you don't have to give like a huge explanation on what's going on. You can simply call and say, hey, I'm at this location and this person isn't breathing, they're unresponsive, and that can be enough. And so to perform rescue breathing, which is the next step, you would first lay the person on their back and then you would tilt their head up and pinch their nose. And then from there, you would cover their mouth with your mouth and you would start with 2 breaths and then would just watch their chest rise and fall. And so, oops. Okay, and so once you do that, you're ready to administer Narcan. So this is Narcan that you'll all be learning to administer. So what you're going to want to do is first, peel back the device or peel back the packaging on the device. And then you're going to want to put your thumb on the plunger, which is this part. And then you're going to want to put one finger on each side of the nozzle. And then from there, you're going to want to push the Narcan into the person's nostril, and it can be either nostril, and then from there you're just going to press really firmly until you feel the dose be released, and like you'll feel it, so you'll know once the dose has been released. So after you give the person Narcan, what you're going to want to do is give what we call aftercare. So you're going to want to first put the person in a rescue position. So this is just turning the person over on their side and then pulling their leg out in front of them to prevent them from rolling over or choking, since what tends to happen when someone overdoses is that once they're like revived, they throw up sometimes, and that can be something that's like unexpected. So it's important that you all know that, but it's also super important that you have them on their side so that they don't choke. And then once that person regains consciousness, they're going to be very disoriented because they just overdosed, and that's like a scary experience. And so you're just gonna want to remain very calm and reassuring, and speak very simply and just explain what happened and let them know that you called emergency services and that help is on the way. And Narcan, as I mentioned earlier, wears off pretty quickly. It wears off anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes, but the opioids may stay in their system for much longer, which is why additional additional doses may be required and why it's so important that you call emergency medical services for this person so that they can receive any additional care as needed. And so that was very brief, but we're just going to jump into some commonly asked questions. But of course, if there are more questions, we'll be sure to address them at the end of the meeting. So the first question is, can I separate the nasal sprays that come in a kit? So when you get a box of Narcan, it's going to come with 2 individual Narcans, and we recommend that you keep them together because, like I've said, the person may require more than 1 dose. So it's better safe than sorry that you just keep both of them together just in case. The second really common question is, does Narcan expire? And Narcan technically has an expiration date, but you should never hesitate to use expired Narcan just because it has been found to work long after it's expired. So never hesitate to use it and always keep it even if it says it's expired. And so, like I mentioned earlier, after you give someone Narcan, they may be very surprised, they might be nauseous, or they might be upset. So it's really important that you speak simply and remain calm, and just be very reassuring and let them know that you gave them Narcan and that paramedics will be arriving soon. And opioids do remain in the body for at least 1 day, which is why it's super, super important that the person receive medical attention at like a hospital. And another common question that I get when doing these trainings is, can Narcan get someone high? And I think a lot of people think this because it's like technically a medication, but the answer is no. Narcan does not get anyone high. What it does is block the opioids, so there's like no way for that to happen. And another thing that some people tend to think is that, like already gave this person Narcan and they already regained consciousness, like they're good to go. But that's not the case. You still need to call 911 because the person may fall back into an overdose, and in like generally extra medical attention is needed. So always call 911. And then another really common question, I think this is also very important because it gets rid of some like the myths around like substance use, but a lot of people worry that they'll get in trouble for being present when like an overdose happens, and the truth is that the Good Samaritan law protects you from arrest, charge, and prosecution for being under the influence or possessing drugs or drug paraphernalia, as long as you make a good faith attempt to get medical care for the person who experienced an overdose. However, there are a few circumstances where this won't apply. So, like if you're under like parole, or if you're obstructing law enforcement or medical workers from doing their job, or if you're selling drugs or forcing people to take drugs, this rule will not apply to you. And I think this is kind of part of why most of us are here today. But what can I do as a parent? So like I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, it's really important that we acknowledge that teen substance use is going to happen. And this doesn't mean that every teen is going to be using, and this doesn't mean that because like someone in the news was like taking pills, it doesn't mean that your kid is going to be taking pills just because um like substance use is just so different and it varies so much by where you are. Um, like was mentioned earlier, like at my school, I've seen, some of my peers like vape, but that doesn't mean that vaping is going to be an issue at every single high school in Marin, which is why I believe that it's really important that you have open and honest conversations with your child about substance use. And this can kind of be a tricky subject, just because, you don't want to like bring it up in a way that feels antagonizing, but I think that one way to bring it up could just be, saying, "Oh, I saw something in the news about fentanyl or overdoses or Narcan," and that can just be a really easy conversation starter. Or you could all even say, "Hey, I went to an event last night that, talked about Narcan. Like, have you heard about this? Like, what are your thoughts?" And, just going off of that, another thing that I would recommend would be for you to carry Narcan and get Narcan for your teen, just because Narcan can be kind of hard to access just because, you're not able to get it from school, and the Narcan distribution centers that are in Marin, sometimes can just be, you know, a little far or just out of reach. So I highly recommend you get Narcan for your teen just so that they have quick access to it. And I think it's also really important that, you know, if you know that your child is using, that you just have them take preventative measures because, you know, you never want them to use alone, you know, in case something were to happen, you always want them, you know, to be with someone. And it's just things like that that we can do as parents to help our kids feel less alone. But yeah, thank you all for having me. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll be doing the Q&A at the end of the meeting. But yeah, thank you. I'll pass it back to Molly.
Thank you so much, Jessica. We got so many great questions in the chat. So I also want to thank everyone for your patience as we're gathering these questions, holding on to them for a really exciting Q&A, which I'm excited for based on some of the questions that you all have. They're all great questions. With that, we're going to transition to our last speaker of the evening. You all have gotten a great lineup for tonight. We are wrapping up with our last speaker as Dr. Matt Willis. Dr. Matt Willis has been the Marin County Public Health Officer for 10 years now. He holds a medical degree from Temple and has completed a master's in public health and internal medicine residency at Harvard. Dr. Willis is a champion for innovative and collaborative approaches to address the opioid epidemic locally, and we're so grateful to have you. So I'll pass it over to Dr. Matt Willis.
Thank you. You know, I think maybe I'll just go without slides. Given the time, and you know, I think one of the things we learned in the pandemic is that we really need to just be working together and having honest, open conversations about the threats that we're facing. So I think I'll start with just a quick summary of where we are with regards to fentanyl, some of the strategies we're employing, and then get to some of the questions. Does that sound okay? So some of you may have seen the public health advisory that we issued yesterday around a spike in fentanyl use in Marin County in September. Thank you, Jessica, for explaining so well what fentanyl is and the particular value of Narcan. And thank you, Michelle, for fielding so many of the chat questions so well. So you can refer to that for some of the background information. So as you may know, we started looking at wastewater in Marin County during the pandemic to look at SARS-CoV-2 levels, the virus that causes COVID-19. And that particular form of surveillance expanded to a variety of different communicable diseases. And then we were among the first counties to start applying that same technology to substances of concern, including fentanyl and xylazine. About 4 months ago, you know, this is maybe a month into our wastewater surveillance for substances, we did detect xylazine. Xylazine, as you may recall, is a high potency sedative that had been kind of moving across the United States, causing some overdose events. We have not seen any presence of xylazine since then, nor we have seen any overdoses in xylazine, but it was a sign to us that having seen it in the wastewater, I was able to communicate to our providers that it is present and have have them be on the lookout for patients who may be coming in with overdose symptoms that might be consistent with xylazine. Yesterday's alert was advisory was the first that we had actually issued based on fentanyl spikes. And what we had seen in the week of September 17th was a doubling in the amount of fentanyl in our wastewater, in particular norfentanyl, which is the metabolite of fentanyl when people use. The following week, we saw a doubling in the number of opioid-related overdoses, people calling 911 for an opioid overdose to 8. Normally, we see an average of about 4 per week, where it's an opioid overdose. This was double that, and we thought that was an important correlation. We're still really trying to understand and learn from what the wastewater surveillance for substances can do for us, but I think this was a strong signal for us that we needed to communicate to the public, especially our clinicians. So we issued that advisory. The key messages that accompany a signal like that when we see an increase in fentanyl is measures that we should be taking anyway, but are vitally important when we are at increased risk. And they are first to acknowledge, for people to be aware that the risk is increased over baseline. The second is to not experiment with drugs of any kind. One of the most important factors that's been brought up tonight is that we know that Marin County has a history and a culture that is, let's call it, relatively tolerant of substances. We have, some of the highest performance across a variety of different health indicators as a county. But when it comes to substances, we're almost always kind of at the back of the pack with regards to counties across the state. And it's been that way for a long time, and Lori and others share that data. The problem is the lethality of what is normative has increased with fentanyl. It has become more dangerous to experiment with drugs. And that's kind of my largest concern as a public health officer, is that our young people who may be sort of enculturated to think of substance experimentation as normative, as part of our culture, may end up getting into trouble with fentanyl and having potentially a fatal overdose experience. So that's, I think, why we wanted to issue that public health advisory. So the messages again are that we first to recognize the risk is increased. Do not experiment with drugs, especially during that interval where we know there's increased risk. It's either because there's more fentanyl, just in the more availability of fentanyl, or it's because there's more contamination of fentanyl. When we see a spike in fentanyl levels in the wastewater, it either means that substances that people are using normally are newly contaminated, or a higher potency contamination, or that there's just more fentanyl available, price differences, or a batch may have arrived. We really don't have a lot of visibility on the supply side, but we can see the impacts in terms of the amount in the wastewater. So to carry Narcan is vitally important during those episodes, especially testing drugs if people are going to be using drugs, because we also know that the just say no, NO, is less effective as a strategy compared to just say no, KNOW, like this meeting tonight. So people need to know. And fentanyl test strips, I see one of the chat questions, is an effective way of determining whether or not a substance that someone is going to use regardless, maybe, or that someone is planning to use, is contaminated with fentanyl, and make an informed decision about that. And fentanyl test strips are available in Marin County for free. And the other is to not use alone. Sometimes when we do see overdose events, it's because someone was on their own, didn't recognize that there was risk, and didn't have anyone nearby that might be able to revive them with Narcan. And then obviously seeing this as an opportunity for people who are struggling with substance use disorder or substance use problems to reach out and seek the help that they deserve. We have since then not seen, the latest wastewater data from today shows that it's normalized. So that spike has now normalized again. And we're not seeing our last few days of EMS, our 911 surveillance has not shown a persistence of that higher level. So we seem to have gone back down, which to me highlights the kind of unpredictability and variability of risk in Marin County when we see a spike like that lasts for like a week and then goes away. So you really never know. So it really is also an important message to double down on those precautions that we're becoming more and more familiar with. So that's an update on that particular September episode that I think some of you had questions about. And maybe I'll just pause there for questions. And I can someone moderate the chat, or however we want to do the discussion part of this?
Yeah, I can send you or I can shout out a couple of the questions that have come in. We've gotten tons of great ones. And maybe we'll do just a couple now, and then I'll pass it back to you, Dr. Willis, and then we'll do a larger Q&A at the end to also get some of the questions that were asked for Jessica and Lori as well.
And can you clarify, so we're going to go over? Was this till 8?
This is till 8:30. I'm keeping an eye on time so that we have time for the Q&A as well. But I'd love to maybe pass you one or two questions that have just been coming up frequently, and then maybe we can go back and you can share a little more as well. One of the questions that kind of keeps coming up is just kind of, how is this happening? How are we finding that fentanyl is going into substances that are, children are using? Just like, what's the context, or how is this, where is this coming from?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think we've been able to describe the sort of global patterns that where fentanyl ends up in our backyard, where it's, there's laboratories in China, then pathways to Mexico where it comes across the border. I think there's been, pretty clear description of that general source. Obviously, it's very hard to control the supply side because fentanyl is odorless, it is highly potent, it is a powder, and a very small amount, like the equivalent of a few grains of salt could actually be a lethal dose. So it's easy to move across borders undetected in significant amounts, potentially amounts that could be damaging at a community level. So there is a lot of attention on the supply side from the DEA and others. I really think that we really need to be working on the demand side more than we don't have direct control over the supply side anyway as citizens. But I think even then it's going to be very difficult. As long as there's demand for fentanyl, it'll be very difficult to control the supply because money's being made and it's very easy to manufacture and smuggle. We do, yeah, that's the answer to that question.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask one more, probably simple question that you can answer for us. And then I think if you'd like to continue speaking, I'll pass it back to you and then we'll do a larger Q&A shortly after. But one of the big questions that came through was, how can folks hear about these advisories? How can they be kind of kept in the loop in terms of Marin County public health announcements and information, especially with trends like this?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think one of our strategies and goals is to keep the community as informed as possible through forums like this. We do have a variety of coalitions that have evolved over the past 5 years. And when we formed ODRX Safe Marin in 2014, it was kind of a unique coalition. There wasn't a lot happening in this space. Now it's hard for me to even keep up with the number of different community-based organizations and school-based organizations and others that have come up around this, which is all very, very good. And I think we all share the objective of getting the word out to those to our member communities. So the one is the school. So really working with Marin County Office of Education. They're one of our best partners during the pandemic and since, to have kind of a uniform message go out where everyone's getting the same message at the same time. My public health advisories generally are geared towards clinicians, and the one I wrote yesterday was really more clinically focused. I did hear feedback that we want kind of a more community-facing public health advisory. So that will be a shift in our strategy moving forward, where there would be kind of a parallel public health alert for community members and for clinicians. I really need, still need a specific set of communications to clinicians. But what I've learned is that the community wants at the same time to hear kind of an analogous for the community. So we'll start doing that. And it might be, one would be an alert, one would be an advisory. We'll find a way to distinguish those two in the future.
Thank you so much. I would like to just ask you, Dr. Willis, would you like to continue sharing a little bit more about what you were planning to present, or there are tons of questions.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, for some reason I have until 8 for this, so I thought.
Oh no, you got time.
Super. Yeah, if you could just bring my slides up. There's one. There's I think 2 points that I wanted to make with slides.
Sure, Melissa, can you pull that up possibly?
And I'll just get started on them. One is we always looking to the data. I think one of the principles of public health practice in Marin is before we go too far in sort of the world of rumors or hypotheses, really trying to understand what's true and what's happening in our community, and then organize our response around what we can see, recognizing not everything that is important is measurable, and we also acknowledge that. One of the interesting pieces of data that came across this past week was a survey. If you could go to slide maybe 15, was a survey that was administered by Song for Charlie. Next slide, please. I'll get you to it. Next. 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 So song for chart, here we go. So this was the California's Perceptions of Pills and Fentanyl Survey 2023. And this is an online survey that was conducted in June and May. About 1,500 Californians divided in half between parents and youth. And they asked, in the same family, asked kids and their parents about conversations they may have had. Next slide, please. And I thought this was really, as a dad, I've got three kids here in Marin Public School. I've got an 8th grader at White Hill, and someone who just graduated from Archie. And I'm always struggling myself in how to manage these conversations within the household. And I thought this was important, that they asked teenagers, have you talked to your parents about illegal drugs? And as parents, have you talked to your teenager about it? And if it's the same family, you expect it to be 50-50, right? About the same. What we see consistently is that parents overestimate the amount that they're talking to their kids, right? So for that, have you talked to your parents about drugs? Kids about 45% of the time say yes. Their parents about 80% of the time say yes, right? Have you talked about prescription pills without a prescription? Kids say about 30% of the time yes. Adults, 60-something% of the time. Mental health issues. Have you talked to your kid about mental health issues? Parents overestimate compared to their kids whether or not they've had those conversations. And next slide, please. And then the question is, how frequently have to talk to your parents and teens about the use of prescription pills without a prescription? And parents are saying, yeah, it's like double the amount. Your parents really overestimating the frequency with which they think they're having those conversations with their kids compared to kids. And then kids are saying that they're having them, much less frequently, some 3 times as many say they've never had that conversation compared to their parents. So that to me, illustrates the fact that we, as parents, need to do a lot more communication. Next slide, please. So the take home is that parents and their kids are talking less than they should about mental health and substance use at a very basic level. And parents overestimate how much they connect with their kids about these issues. So I think, I can see a lot of us on this call are parents of kids in Marin County schools now. And it's probably true of us as well, that we may overestimate how much we connect with our kids. And I hopefully that data will embolden us to go ahead and have that conversation, even if it feels like it's redundant. Can I have the next slide, please? And next slide. I wanted to share with you also this fentanyl awareness campaign. We recognize that one of the most important strategies to us is education and awareness. We've partnered at the county with the Marin Independent Journal, with Marin Community Foundation, and an advertising agency to launch this campaign. And a lot of the content is actually drawn from some of our youth members in our coalitions, including the OD Free Marin Youth Action Team. To really have an edgy, non-government-y look and feel to this, where even the title, where's the fentanyl, WTF? And on the left there, you see just an example of one of the products that came out when this campaign was first launched. Basically, where's the fentanyl mean? That's every single city and town in Marin listed there. And that's because that's actually data driven, because when we look at our 911 responses over the past year or two, every single city and town our ambulances are traveling everywhere, right? It's not just to some areas. It's one of the particular challenges of the fentanyl crisis is that it is not just one corner of our community that's impacted. It's all, basically every community, people of all ages, race, ethnicities, incomes are impacted. And on the right there, one of the most important points, I think, for this conversation tonight is that 6 out of 10 fake prescription pills have been determined to be contaminated with fentanyl. by the DEA. And that's, Michelle has been commenting on that in the chat. Michelle Leopold, who's one of our angel moms, who's has Ace Hardware. I'm just giving a shout out for you, Michelle, for everything you've done. Michelle hosted a Narcan training at our Ace Hardware store on National Overdose Awareness Day. But the message is that that prescription pills, if they're not prescribed to you, may well contain fentanyl. So that, and what we see too frequently, especially among young people who are experimenting, is that they're overdosing on fentanyl because they've taken an Adderall or a Percocet or a Xanax or something else that is actually counterfeit. You can find these on the web, internet. You can be or on the street, exchanging with friends. But if it's not written for you, it may in fact be counterfeit. And that's probably one of the single most important messages that we could convey tonight for you all as parents and for your kids is, and that those are things that may have been sort of more normative 5 years ago, but fentanyl really hit the scene about 3 years ago and is driving overdose deaths. One of the other slides I had, we can take away the slide presentation, was just some basic data about fentanyl that I'm going to share with you. One is that overdose right now in Marin, as of 2022, overdose is the leading cause of death for residents age 55 and younger, which is kind of just a stark singular statement. Overdose is the leading cause of death for everyone age 55 and younger in Marin County. It used to be cancer, it's now overdose. And fentanyl is driving that rise. So it's doubled in the past couple of years. And fentanyl is responsible for about 60%, about 6 out of 10 of those deaths are due to fentanyl. So it is a crisis from a public health standpoint, and it is affecting our younger residents. The other important message around fentanyl is that we have, I guess it's just that it's 6 out of 10, and it's the leading cause of overdose death for anyone age 55 and younger. And I'll open it up to more questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Willis. We've had a number of questions come in, and actually this is maybe a question for all of our speakers. I think especially with that one data point that you shared, Dr. Willis, with the discrepancy of perceptions of frequency of conversations between teens and their parents and parents and their teens. I guess for each of you, for each of our incredible speakers, I'd love to hear or just ask, what are your suggestions? Like, how do we get those to kind of balance each other out, that conversations are really landing with our teens, especially since we're seeing these, these trends ticking upward, and how can we support them with that understanding of how to keep themselves and their peers safe?
Yeah, I'd love to hear others' thoughts on this. I mean, I think one is that we are not alone as parents. One of the messages of the pandemic in terms of our vaccine rates that I learned is that we really need to sort of encircle one another with clear messaging, because you never know who in someone's life is actually that trusted voice. It could be a coach, it could be a teacher, it could be a friend, it could be another parent, like not your parent, but a friend of theirs, or an uncle, wherever that is. So I think one is that recognize that parents do obviously need to have a consistent and sympathetic and compassionate voice, but also recognize that you're part of a community that is also helping those children. We need to be shepherding our children forward together as a community with the same clear messages. And I think that's part of our goal on the public health side, is to offer those best and most concise messaging to everyone, so that we can all take advantage of those moments in those touches with our young people where we might have that influence.
Yeah, I was just going to say it. A statistic that's always stayed with me is that children who talk to their parents frequently about substance use, they're 50% less likely to use those substances themselves. And it's never too early. You start early, as young as ages 10, 12, but it's also never too late to have these conversations. And I think what really helps is just asking questions out of curiosity, not, well, are your friends doing this? Who's doing this? But just, gosh, okay, if you tried it, how did it make you feel? And I'm really curious. And you just get them to open up and have it be a conversation, not a lecture, not one big long conversation, just a series of little ones. Use teachable moments and when things come up on TV or things are in the news, and just keep it casual, and then listen. Do spend most of your time really listening, because kids, they want us to talk to them, and they want to be heard.
One of the things I learned in our conversations around vaccine and addressing people's concerns about vaccine was from a guy named Daniel Epstein, who's a psychiatrist who's done a lot of work on trauma and also on sort of psychology of decision making. And he talks about the 4 S's, and I think about that a lot in sort of how we approach things. That when you're trying to influence someone or change their mindset on something, the conditions for that changing of mind need to be that they feel safe, they feel secure, they feel seen, and they feel soothed. And if you think about the way the conversations often go, it's like the opposite. People feel judged, they feel afraid, they feel ashamed, they feel like all those things are like the opposite of the mindset for actually gaining new insight and changing mindset. So I always think about that now that we sort of thought about that as a strategy for communicating about vaccines, that I now apply with my kids. And it's really changed the way we have conversations in our household. As triggered as I might be, really trying to create that space of safety, security, soothed, and seen.
Thank you so much for that. I love that. I wrote that down for myself. I'd love to actually just ask that same question to Jessica as, our youth speaker, just if you have any tips, especially since, there are a number of parents, caregivers, guardians on the call, that if you as a teen have any recommendations for parents initiating, continuing these conversations with their teens, what do you recommend?
Yeah, I would definitely just echo what's already been said, but I think like Lori said, just not making it like an interrogation, trying to keep it as, like an easygoing conversation, because, this is like a very touchy subject. And if your child chooses like to open up about this, I think it's really important um that you not try to be super like interrogative when you have this conversation, just because I know, like, if it were me and I were talking to my parent about this, if my parents were like pressing me about the issue, I feel like I would kind of like step back and say like, is this something I want to talk about? So yeah, just definitely letting your child like lead the conversation, and letting them kind of like guide you, and just like recognizing when they might not want to share more information, and just kind of having the mindset of like, I can pick up this conversation another day, and like it's okay for us to leave it where it is right now.
Thank you so much to all of you for sharing those insights. I'd love to ask some more of the questions that have been coming in. There have been a couple questions about just like what's happening at schools. How is this information getting to our young people? Obviously, like we've gotten some great tips on how to have those conversations at home, but maybe if any of our speakers can share a little bit about what's happening on school campuses in terms of education, and also, sorry, I'm looking at all of these questions and trying to make sure I get them right. But yeah, how are we stopping the spread even on our school campuses as well?
I can start us off. I would say that substance use education at each school definitely varies. Just because each teacher, each district might be having like a different approach. But I know when I was in health class back in ninth grade, from what I recall, I think we definitely didn't talk about like Narcan, and like overdose prevention. I think a lot of it was very centered around like vaping, and just like the what's the right word? The harmful effects. And I think that, it's really important that we keep addressing that. But I think in today's climate, it's becoming so much more relevant to really like address overdose prevention, Narcan, fentanyl. And yet I'm really glad that so many people in the chat are, wondering about what like education around that is being done in schools because I know through my work on the Youth Commission and with OD Free Marin, I've been trying to do more presentations, about like Narcan and fentanyl at high schools. But it can just be one of those things that's, tricky to coordinate. But there are a lot of efforts in Marin being made to get this information to teens. So hopefully it'll, get to every teen at some point.
Can I just one of the questions in the chat about middle school? So there's a few I think have suggested that we need to be starting sooner in education, and a lot of the curriculum around this is really high school focused, and we recognize that the behaviors in high school are the seeds are sown earlier, and that in fact we're seeing use earlier. When we look at our data, is at seventh grade, we're starting to see increases in substance use at that seventh grade level. And we know that, generally from a public health perspective, one of the principles is the longer we can get someone through their youth before they start using substances, if they start using substances, the better off they are, the less likely they're going to have a life of addiction or other related harms. And so it's really concerning when you see people starting that early. And in response, we've worked with Marin County Office of Education and our Behavioral Health Recovery Services at Health and Human Services to develop a pilot curriculum for middle schools. And the goal there is to make sure that at the middle school level in a way that's appropriate for middle schoolers, because a lot of this is not really appropriate, but it needs to be tailored for middle schoolers. And we're working with an organization that's actually going to come into a few of our middle schools to do a pilot curriculum this year, to have a standardized set of messages so that every child going through middle school will at least have a minimum education around this across the county as a new local public health priority. And I think the three schools are some of our larger public schools to begin with, and then we'll spread it from there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Willis. I did see that Anna McGee, I saw you had your hand up in case you wanted to share a question or make an announcement or anything like that. You might have to raise your hand again. Oh, I think there you go.
Thank you. It wasn't allowing me to unmute. I'm the wellness coordinator for Novato Unified School District, and Jessica is one of our students at Novato High School, so glad to see you here. So we are working with Song for Charlie to bring them to our schools. They are a very busy organization with all the work they're doing. So we are looking to bring them to, and we've also shared that education that you referenced earlier, our health classes and in our wellness hubs as well. So I know there was some reference to Tam, who has had wellness hubs and centers for quite a while. And this is an initiative that Novato Unified has been working on quite significantly within the last couple of years. So we are doing the work, and we're really happy to partner with parents doing the work at home as well. So thank you for having this.
Can I just want to make sure everyone knows how they could access Narcan too. We've done a lot of work to try and reduce barriers to accessing Narcan, and including working kind of at the legislative level and advocating for policy change. And now Narcan is available in pharmacies. We have Narcan vending machines where it's available for free. Our schools have Narcan on campus. It is, obviously it's a downstream strategy, in that it really only manifests when someone is having an overdose event, but it is a life-saving strategy also. And it's kind of the minimum we need to be able to do is actually be able to reverse an overdose. Once all those other steps to prevent overdoses have failed and someone is having that overdose event, we need to be able to rescue them with a medicine that does that extremely effectively and very easily. Just so that, we're all aware of what the Narcan resources are. It's in the chat, but the OD Free Marin site has places where people can go to obtain free Narcan. Just outside my office, there's a vending machine that we're constantly restocking just to go, and there's no, questions asked. The instructions are just like, on the box. And then pharmacies, your insurance should cover it at a pharmacy as well, or your doctor or nurse, and your own medical provider will also prescribe it if you want to go that way. And I think there was some questions in the chat. Should we be, sending our kids out with Narcan? I honestly think if what I'm seeing now in terms of the wastewater levels and seeing these spikes that we can't predict in fentanyl use and then overdose, that it is probably important for all of us just to have Narcan somewhere at hand. I keep one in my glove compartment. And to the question of whether or not it offers false reassurance, there's very little data that suggests that people are going to use because they have Narcan on hand. That's a myth. When people are using, it's for other reasons, and they can reverse. And obviously you can't reverse yourself with Narcan. It's something that has to be, someone around you would have to be aware of the risk and carrying it and be able to offer it as a bystander.
Thank you so much, Dr. Willis. There were so many questions about how to access Narcan, and so you read my mind. That was going to be one of my last questions, and I apologize to everyone. We got so many great questions that I know we were not able to get to all of them. There are tons of resources that have been shared in our chat and likely will go out as well. I wanted to just take a moment, at least just to thank everyone for coming tonight. There's opportunities to continue this conversation next Tuesday with the Let's Be Average meeting that's coming up. So I believe there's an Eventbrite that you can register for that event. Lastly, really important, there's going to be a post-event survey that we would love your feedback on. This allows us to not only integrate your feedback, improve, make these really valuable for you, and really spot on to what we're worried about, what we want answers for, what solutions we want to brainstorm. For anyone that needs an incentive, there will be a random drawing and 2 people will get $25 DoorDash gift cards. So please be sure to check out the survey. But I really want to thank our incredible speakers for their time, their expertise, their suggestions. Thank you all for being here tonight. It really demonstrates how much our community really cares about solving this problem. And so please take care of yourselves, your loved ones, hug them extra tight tonight, and we'll see you all at our next discussion in December. Thank you so much for being here.